They slapped me for being poor at a gala. Then my billionaire father's helicopter landed. They tore my dress at their charity gala and called me a gold-digging nobody. My boyfriend stood frozen while his mother slapped me in front of 200 elite guests. The crowd filmed everything. 3 million people watched me get humiliated. Then my billionaire father's helicopter landed on the rooftop, and their world imploded in real time. Before we begin, if you love stories about justice, karma, and exposing fake people, smash that subscribe button right now. Trust me, you won't believe what happens when privilege meets consequences. Stay until the very end because the revenge, it's devastatingly perfect. My name is Sofia, and I need to tell you about the night I discovered who people really are when they think you're beneath them. But first, you need to understand who I really am. I'm the only daughter of Marcus Delacroix. Yes, that Delacroix, the pharmaceutical billionaire. Forbes estimates our family fortune at $12 billion. Growing up, I had everything money could buy. Private islands, European boarding schools, galas with actual royalty. But here's what I didn't have. Real friends, genuine love, people who saw me, not my father's bank account. By the time I turned 24, I was suffocated by the fakeness. Every person who came into my life wanted something, a business connection, an investment, a lifestyle upgrade, so I made a decision my father thought was insane. I disappeared into normalcy. Well, not completely, but I started living like a regular person. I became Sofia Martinez, an elementary school teacher. Small apartment, secondhand furniture, a beat-up Honda Civic. I told people my last name was Martinez, not Delacroix. For 18 months, I lived simply, quietly. And honestly, I was happier than I'd ever been behind mansion walls. Then I met David. It was at a community library fundraiser on a Saturday afternoon. He was organizing book donations, struggling to set up a display table. I helped him arrange it by reading level. He thanked me with coffee from the refreshment table. We talked for 2 hours about our shared passion for helping underprivileged kids. He was an accountant at a mid-sized firm, sweet, thoughtful, genuinely kind, and he had absolutely no idea who I really was. Over the next 10 months, we fell in love. Or at least I thought we did. David knew me as Sofia Martinez, an elementary school teacher who brought extra snacks for hungry students and spent weekends volunteering. He never questioned why I didn't care about expensive restaurants or designer clothes. He thought I was just down to earth. Humble. He called me the most genuine person he'd ever met. His family, he told me, would adore me. That should have been my first warning sign. 3 weeks ago, David came to my small apartment, nervous and excited. His mother, Victoria, was hosting their annual charity gala. It was a major event, apparently. Senators, business leaders, elite donors, and he wanted me there to meet his family officially. I said yes, but I made a choice. I would go as myself. Simple Sofia, not Delacroix heiress Sofia. This would be the ultimate test. If his family could accept me without the money, without the status, then maybe this love was real. Maybe David was different from everyone else. My father's chief of staff, Margaret, tried to talk me out of it. Margaret has known me since I was 5 years old. She's seen me through everything. When I told her my plan, she looked worried. "Miss Sofia," she said carefully, "are you certain about this? Some families reveal their prejudices most clearly when they believe they have social superiority." I smiled sadly at her. "That's exactly why I need to do this, Margaret. If David's family can't accept me as a teacher, they don't deserve me as an heiress." She sighed. "Your father doesn't know about David yet, does he?" "No, and let's keep it that way for now." What I didn't know was that this decision, this test, would expose not just his family's true nature, but also the man I thought I loved, and it would all be captured on camera for millions to witness. For 18 months, and I lived a life that most people in my circles would consider a nightmare, but for me, it was the first time I could finally breathe. As Sofia Martinez, my world was measured in lesson plans and the scent of chalkboard dust rather than stock options and offshore accounts. I traded a penthouse overlooking Central Park for a drafty one-bedroom apartment where the radiator clanked through the night. I shopped at thrift stores, finding a strange thrill in a $5 blouse, and took the bus to work alongside people who worked 3 jobs just to stay afloat. To my students, I was simply the teacher who kept a drawer full of granola bars for the kids who came to school hungry. To my colleagues, I was the reliable volunteer who stayed late to decorate the gym for bake sales. For the first time, the smiles I received weren't transactional, and nobody was looking past my shoulder to see if my father was watching. They were looking at me. Then I met David Chen. It happened at a community library fundraiser, the kind of modest event where the wine comes from a box, and the goal is a few $100s for new picture books. He was an accountant, steady and unassuming, with a laugh that made the stresses of my double life melt away. We fell in love over $3 tacos and long, winding walks through the public park. In my cramped living room, we'd share a single bowl of popcorn and watch old movies, the flickering light reflecting the genuine warmth in his eyes. He often told me I was the most grounded, authentic person he'd ever met. Every time he said it, a small part of me winced, knowing the $12 billion secret I was guarding. Margaret. At my father's longtime chief of staff, and the only person who knew where I was, didn't share my romantic optimism. During one of our secret check-ins, she watched me recount a date with David and sighed, her expression etched with worry. "Miss Sofia, are you certain about continuing this deception? Some families reveal their prejudices most clearly when they believe they have social superiority." I looked at her, my resolve hardening. "That's exactly why I need to do this, Margaret. If David's family can't accept me as a teacher, they certainly don't deserve me as an heiress. I need to know if the man I love has the spine to stand by a woman who has nothing but her character." "Your father doesn't know about him yet, does he?" she asked. "No," I replied firmly. And let's keep it that way." The test arrived a week later in the form of a heavy, gold-embossed envelope. David was taking me to the Chen family's annual charity gala. It was time to see what lay beneath the surface of his kind family, and whether the love we'd built in the shadows could survive the blinding, cruel lights of high society. The night before the gala, I stood in my tiny bedroom, staring into a closet that held only a single rack of modest clothes. In my other life, the one currently gathering dust in a climate-controlled vault, I had a dressing room the size of this entire apartment, filled with custom Chanel and floor-length Valentino. But tonight, I reached for a simple cream-colored dress I'd found on a clearance rack for $45. It had a modest neckline and a clean silhouette, it entirely devoid of the labels that usually acted as a passport into high society. I skipped the diamonds, opting instead for the small pearl studs my mother gave me before she passed away. They were the only things I owned that felt at home in both of my worlds. As I pinned my hair into a simple updo and applied a touch of natural makeup, I looked in the mirror and saw Sofia Martinez, a dedicated teacher, a woman of substance, and a person whose worth wasn't tied to a price tag. I felt proud of her. When David arrived to pick me up, he was dressed in a sharp-tailored suit, expensive enough to signal success, but lacking the effortless fit of true bespoke. The moment his eyes landed on me, a flicker of something unsettled crossed his face. It wasn't quite disappointment, but it was certainly concern. "You look beautiful," he said, though his gaze lingered a second too long on the lack of silk or sequins. His voice lacked the conviction I needed to hear. I felt the first sharp sting of a red flag, a quiet warning I chose to bury under a smile. The car ride was a frantic monologue of nervous energy. David spent the entire trip managing my expectations, though it felt more like he was managing his own fear. He spoke of his mother, Victoria, being particular about propriety, and his father, Lawrence, holding traditional standards for the family legacy. He described his sister Melissa as someone with high expectations for his romantic choices. Every sentence was a defensive barrier he was building before we even reached the door. "They just move in certain circles, Sophia," he said, his hands tightening on the steering wheel. "Old money, charity boards, you the country club set. But they'll love you once they get to know you." The words "once they get to know you" hung in the air like a looming threat, suggesting that my current self, the woman he claimed to love, wasn't enough to pass the initial inspection. We pulled up to the Grandmont Hotel, a fortress of marble and gold where a single plate of hors d'oeuvres cost more than my monthly rent. As we stepped into the ballroom, the opulence was deafening. Crystal chandeliers threw fractured light over ice sculptures and designer gowns that cost more than most luxury cars. 200 of the city's most elite citizens turned as one. The silence that followed was visceral. In my $45 dress, I wasn't just a guest. I was a glitch in their perfect expensive matrix. The stares began immediately, cold and dissecting, and for the first time, David didn't pull me closer. He stepped slightly away. The air in the ballroom was thick with the scent of expensive lilies and even more expensive judgment. As we moved through the crowd, the whispers followed us like a draft. I caught snatches of conversation. "Who is that with David?" And "she looks so plain," tossed out by women draped in silk who didn't realize I knew exactly how much their outfits cost. David's hand was heavy on my lower back, but he wasn't holding me for comfort. He was steering me, his posture rigid as if he were trying to physically shield his reputation from my presence. Then I saw her. Victoria Chen stood at the base of the grand staircase, a diamond necklace glittering against her throat with a brilliance that signaled old-world dominance. She was a woman who clearly viewed the world through the lens of hierarchy, and as we approached, I watched her face undergo a terrifying transformation. The warmth she held for her son vanished the instant her gaze landed on me, replaced by a clinical, icy disdain. Her heels clicked against the marble floor like a countdown as she approached us. "David, darling," she murmured, leaning in for a practiced air kiss while her eyes performed a brutal autopsy on my appearance. "And this must be the teacher you mentioned." The way she spat the word "teacher" made it sound like a terminal illness. "Mom, this is Sophia," David said, his voice reaching a pitch of nervous compliance I'd never heard before. "Sophia, my mother, Victoria Chen." I maintained my composure, extending my hand with the same genuine warmth I gave the parents of my students. "It's such an honor to meet you, Mrs. Chen. David speaks so highly of his family." Victoria didn't take my hand immediately. She stared at it for 3 agonizing seconds, her lip curling slightly before she offered a handshake so limp and cold it felt like touching a ghost. "Does he? How quaint." Her voice had the power to freeze fire. She didn't let go of her scrutiny for a second. "Tell me, dear, which school district do you work in?" "Lincoln Elementary. I teach 3rd grade," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "Public school," she stated. It wasn't a question. It was a diagnosis of my social standing. "How admirably humble." Before I could respond, Melissa, David's sister, appeared at her mother's elbow. She was a polished mirror image of Victoria's cruelty, her eyes scanning my $45 dress like a threat assessment. "Oh my God. David, you weren't kidding," she laughed, the sound sharp and metallic. "She really is just a teacher." That just hit harder than any physical blow. I could feel the circle of elite guests tightening around us, their curiosity piqued by the scent of blood in the water. David shifted beside me, looking everywhere but at me as the battle lines were drawn in the marble sand. Victoria didn't wait for the silence to settle. She moved in for the kill, her eyes narrowed as she searched for the cracks in my foundation. "And your family, dear? What exactly do your parents do?" I recognized the maneuver instantly. This was the classic interrogation of the elite, the weighted question designed to establish whether a person is an asset or a liability to the family brand. "My mother passed away when I was young," I said softly, and the old ache of loss mingling with the new sting of their judgment. "My father is in pharmaceuticals." It was the absolute truth, phrased in a way that fit the woman I was pretending to be. My father, Marcus Delacroix, didn't just work in pharmaceuticals. He dominated the industry globally. But Victoria's eyes gleamed with a flash of false, patronizing sympathy. "Oh, how tragic about your mother. And your father, a pharmacist? How nice. A very stable, hard-working profession." The image of my father, a man who advised heads of state, standing behind a retail counter filling prescriptions, was almost absurd enough to make me laugh, but the venom in Melissa's smirk stopped me. "Let me guess," Melissa chimed in, swirling her champagne with a bored elegance. "You met David at some low-level charity event he dragged himself to, and you saw a successful accountant and thought, 'There's my ticket up?'" The accusation was naked and ugly. It hung in the air between us, thick with the implication that I was a predator and David was the unsuspecting prey. David shifted uncomfortably beside me, his shoulder pulling away just an inch. "Melissa, come on." He started, but his voice lacked any real edge of defense. "Come on. What?" Victoria interrupted, her voice rising just enough to draw the attention of a passing senator. "Your sister has a point, David. We know absolutely nothing about this girl's background, her education, or her family connections. You bring her to our gala, where we host the pillars of this city, and she shows up looking like she shopped at a discount store." The heat flooded my face, a physical reaction to the public shaming I wasn't used to enduring. I took a breath, forcing my voice to remain level. "Mrs. Chen, I understand this dress isn't designer, but I bought what I could afford on a teacher's—" "Exactly," Victoria cut me off, her words sharp as a guillotine. "A teacher's salary. David, darling, you are a Chen. Your grandfather built this city's most successful real estate empire. We have standards, we have expectations, we don't just marry anyone." The word marry seemed to physically strike David. He flinched, his composure crumbling into a pathetic, stammering mess. "Mom, we haven't even talked about—" His denial was more devastating than his silence. He wasn't just failing to defend me, he was actively distancing himself from the very idea of a future with me. The test was intensifying. And as I looked at the man I thought I loved, I realized the man I had fallen for might have been just as much a fiction as Sofia Martinez. Lawrence Chen appeared then, a silver-haired monolith of corporate authority who looked at me not as a person, but as a smudge on his polished floor. "What is the commotion?" he asked, his voice a low rumble of disapproval. Victoria gestured toward me like she was presenting Exhibit A in a criminal trial. "Your son has brought an unsuitable guest to our event," she said, her voice dripping with venom. Lawrence adjusted his silk tie and looked me over with a clinical, detached coldness. "I can see that," he said. "Young lady, do you understand what this gala represents? We have raised $3 million tonight for underprivileged children. Our donors expect a certain caliber of company." The irony was a jagged pill to swallow. They were spending the evening patting themselves on the back for helping underprivileged youth, while simultaneously treating a primary school teacher like a stray dog that had wandered into a palace. Melissa circled me then, her eyes gleaming with the predatory instinct of a shark that had finally found the wound. "That dress is from Marshall's, isn't it?" she asked, her voice rising to carry across the nearest tables. "I saw it in the clearance section last month. $45, marked down from $80. How pathetic." A ripple of laughter moved through the nearby guests, actual, audible laughter from people who spent more on appetizers than I supposedly made in a month. I felt the familiar weight of high-end smartphones being raised. I saw the telltale glow of a live stream beginning, a digital audience of thousands suddenly invited to watch my execution. Victoria stepped into my personal space, her expensive floral perfume cloying and suffocating. "Listen carefully, dear," she hissed, her face inches from mine. "I don't know what game you're playing, but my son is not your meal ticket. David deserves someone from his world, someone with breeding, education, and connections, someone who actually belongs here. You?" She looked me up and down with a contempt so pure it was almost physical. "You're just a charity case trying to social climb into a family light years above your station." The slap was sudden and sharp. The sound of her palm meeting my cheek cracked through the ballroom like a gunshot, silencing the music and the whispers in an instant. My head snapped to the side and a bloom of white-hot pain radiated across my face. Gasps erupted from the crowd, but nobody moved to help. Instead, more phones went up, the live stream viewer counts exploding into the tens of thousands as the world watched a billionaire's son allow his mother to assault a nobody. "David," I whispered, my voice trembling as I clutched my burning cheek. I turned to the man who had promised to protect me, the man who had seen me at my most vulnerable and called it beautiful. He was pale, his eyes fixed firmly on the marble floor, his body frozen in a posture of ultimate cowardice. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He simply let me stand there, bleeding dignity in front of a million strangers. The silence following the slap was short-lived, broken not by an apology, but by the sound of Melissa's laughter. She stepped forward, her eyes dancing with a cruel, manic energy. "You've humiliated our family enough!" she screamed, her hand darting out to grab the neckline of my dress. She yanked with a violence that caught me off guard, and the cheap fabric gave way with a sickening, jagged tear. The sound seemed to amplify in the cavernous room, echoing off the gilded ceilings. The strap of my dress fell away, exposing my shoulder and undergarments to the harsh glare of the chandeliers. I clutched the ruined fabric to my chest, my face burning with a shame so deep it felt like it would swallow me whole. Around me, the guests weren't just watching, they were performing. They angled their phones for the best shot of my exposure, their faces twisted into masks of mockery and morbid fascination. The live stream count was a digital roar now, hundreds of thousands of strangers witnessing the calculated destruction of a human being. "Security!" Victoria's voice rang out, authoritative and triumphant. "Remove this person from our event immediately!" As two burly men in black suits approached to haul me away like a piece of refuse, I turned to David. One last time. I didn't need him to be a hero, I just needed him to be a man. I looked for a spark of outrage, a hand reached out, a single word of protest. Instead, I saw him take a deliberate step back, his gaze sliding away from mine to study the bubbles in his champagne glass. In that moment, the heartbreak didn't shatter me. It crystallized. The warmth I had felt for him for 10 months turned to ice. This wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a revelation. He didn't love me. He loved the convenience of me, and that convenience had just expired. "I see," I said, my voice quiet but impossibly steady. I stopped struggling against the fabric in my hands and stood tall, even as the guards reached for my arms. That's when the vibration started. It began as a low, guttural hum that rattled the champagne flutes on the nearby tables. Then it grew into a rhythmic thrumming that made the massive crystal chandeliers begin to sway and chime. "What on earth is that?" Victoria demanded, glancing toward the ceiling, her brows knit in annoyance that her spotlight was being stolen. The sound became a deafening roar. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, a shadow eclipsed the moon. A massive, matte black corporate helicopter, its rotors kicking up a cyclonic wind that whipped against the glass, was descending toward the hotel's private rooftop helipad. The crowd surged toward the windows, the live stream viewer count ticking past 500,000 as the mystery shifted the room's axis. "Who would arrive like that?" Lawrence muttered, his composure finally cracking into genuine confusion. The thrumming died down, leaving a ringing silence in the ballroom. Then the heavy oak doors at the far end of the hall were thrown open with a force that made the brass handles clatter against the stone. The doors didn't just open, they surrendered. Marcus Delacroix stepped into the ballroom with the kind of absolute terrifying presence that silenced the music and froze the breath in 200 throats. At 6'2", with silver fox hair and a custom-tailored suit that whispered of old power, he looked like a god of industry descending into a den of thieves. Behind him marched Margaret, sharp and efficient, followed by a phalanx of private security and 2 lawyers whose very presence felt like a litigation storm. The recognition was instantaneous. This wasn't just a wealthy man. This was the man who owned the patents that kept the world healthy, a titan of Forbes covers and global summits. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, people literally stumbling backward to clear his path. Desperate, sycophantic greetings began to erupt. "Mr. Delacroix, what an unexpected honor!" But my father didn't hear them. His eyes were locked on me, burning with a lethal, protective fury I had only seen a handful of times in my life. When he reached me, the man who made presidents tremble softened into the father who used to read me bedtime stories. He didn't say a word to the security guards who were still clutching my arms. He simply looked at them, and they recoiled as if they'd been burned. He reached out, sliding his heavy wool jacket off his shoulders and draping it around me. The scent of his expensive cologne and home wrapped around me, hiding my torn dress and my shame. "Are you hurt, sweetheart?" His voice was gentle, yet it carried into every corner of the unnervingly silent room. I couldn't find my voice at first. The tears I'd been holding back finally spilled over, hot and blurring. "Dad," I whispered, clutching the lapels of his jacket. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I didn't tell you where I was going." "You have nothing to apologize for," he said firmly, his hand cupping the back of my head for a brief, grounding second. Then he turned. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees as he faced Victoria Chen. The woman who had been a queen moments ago was now a ghost. The blood had drained from her face so completely she looked translucent. "You," my father said, his voice dropping to a terrifying Arctic register, "assaulted my daughter." The room erupted. The whispers turned into a roar of shock as the live stream count ticked past 1 million viewers. The poor teacher was the Delacroix heir. The realization hit the Chens like a physical blow. Victoria's mouth worked soundlessly for a moment before she managed to stammer, Your daughter? Mr. Delacroix, I had no idea. We thought she was—" "You thought she was poor," my father finished, his voice cutting through her excuses like a blade. "So you felt entitled to humiliate her? To lay hands on her and tear her clothing in front of 200 witnesses? You thought her lack of money gave you the right to strip her of her dignity?" Lawrence Chen scrambled forward, his polished facade crumbling into a mask of ashen desperation. "Mr. Delacroix, please," he stammered, his hands shaking as he reached out toward a man who clearly had no intention of shaking them. "There has been a terrible misunderstanding. If we had only known—" "A misunderstanding?" My father's voice was a low, dangerous vibration. He pulled a smartphone from his pocket and pressed a single button. The ballroom, already silent, became a tomb as Victoria's voice blared through the speakers. "You're a charity case, trying to social climb into a family light years above your station." The audio culminated in the sharp, wet crack of the slap. My father stopped the video and looked Lawrence in the eye. "I've been watching the live stream for the past 20 minutes. 1.2 million people have now witnessed your wife assault my daughter while you stood by and provided the audience." I stepped out from the shadow of my father's protection, pulling his heavy jacket tighter around my shoulders. I wiped the salt from my cheeks and looked at Victoria, whose regal posture had vanished, leaving only a hollow, terrified woman. Then I turned my gaze to David. "I came here tonight as just Sofia," I said, my voice gaining a strength that seemed to vibrate in the very air. "Not Sofia Delacroix, Not an heiress, just a woman who spends her days teaching children that their character is the only thing that matters. I wanted to know if I would be accepted for who I am, not what I'm worth. David looked at me, his face a mask of profound horror. He looked as if he were seeing a ghost. I wanted to know if you loved me, David, the real me, but I got my answer, didn't I? You stood there while they called me trash. You stayed silent when your mother struck me. You watched your sister destroy the only dress I could afford, and you didn't say a single word in my defense. Sofia, please, David said, his voice cracking as he literally fell to his knees on the marble floor. The sound of his knees hitting the stone felt like the final gavel of a trial. I didn't know. If I had known who your father was, if I had known who you were— Stop, I said, the word cutting through his pathetic plea like a shard of glass. You're only sorry because of who my father is, not because of what they did to me. If I really had been just a teacher, you would have watched them throw me out into the street like garbage. You aren't sorry they hurt me. You're just sorry you realized you destroyed your chance with a billionaire. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the quiet hum of 1,000,000 people watching his soul wither in real time. My father pulled his phone from his pocket, his movements deliberate and lethal. He didn't lower the volume as he spoke to Margaret. Sever every Delacroix Foundation partnership with the Chen Family Charitable Trust. Effective immediately. Pull every cent. Lawrence Chen's face went from ashen to ghostly. Mr. Delacroix, you can't. That's a $50 million annual commitment. Check the morality clause in the contracts, Lawrence, my father replied, his voice like grinding steel. Physical assault of a foundation representative is more than enough cause. Your charity just lost its heartbeat. Victoria collapsed into a nearby chair, her designer gown bunching around her as she realized the social scaffolding of her life was disintegrating. We'll lose everything, she whispered. Our reputation. Your reputation? My father let out a short, harsh laugh. 2 million people are watching this live. Your reputation didn't just die, it was cremated. Melissa tried to scramble toward me, her mascara running in black streaks down her face. Sofia, please, I didn't know. If you could just talk to him. I told you everything you needed to know, I said, my voice steady as I looked at the woman who had just ripped my clothes. I told you I was a teacher. You called me a social climber and treated me like trash because you thought I was beneath you. One of my father's lawyers stepped forward, handing a crisp set of documents to a stunned Lawrence. Ms. Victoria Chen, you are being served for assault. Mr. Lawrence Chen, your organization is now under investigation for fraudulent practices and tax irregularities. The security guards who had been ready to toss me out backed away as if I were made of fire. My father took my arm gently. Let's go home, Sofia. As we walked away, David made one final pathetic attempt to grab my hand. Sofia, I love you. Please. I stopped but didn't turn around. You don't love me, David. You love the power my father holds. Real love is brave. It stands up when things are ugly. You aren't sorry they hurt me. You're just sorry you lost your seat at the table. The aftermath was a hurricane. The video hit 15 million views in days. The Chen Trust dissolved, David was fired from his firm, and the family was blacklisted from every ballroom in the city. 6 months later, I was back at Lincoln Elementary, not as a secret, but as Sofia Delacroix, teacher and philanthropist. My students didn't care about the money. I had already earned their respect with my heart. I eventually met Raphael, a fellow teacher who knew exactly who I was from the start, but treated me like an equal. When I asked him why, he just smiled. Your last name doesn't teach kids to read. Your character does. That night taught me that the worst moments reveal the most important truths. Test people's character, but when they show you who they are, believe them. Real love is brave, and karma, it's the most patient force on earth. If you believe respect should never have a price tag, subscribe now and tell me in the comments. Have you ever been judged for who you are instead of what you have? Share this to remind someone that their worth is defined by their heart, not their bank account.